chance to watch Dan, hear Dan, and listen to his presentation about storytelling. If you happen to either listen online or go to the international convention in the fall, you might have seen Dan as he was one of our semifinalists. Please welcome our guest educational headliner, Dan McGill.
Thank you. Thank you. Really nice to be here and to see some familiar faces from Florida when I was there in May, I think. And then, yeah, some people who were in California as well. So, yeah, pleasure to be here. I'm going to speak about humor for a few minutes. 2018, I won the district humorous speech contest for the first time in London in our District 91. And I remember after kind of winning each round and then winning the final, I remember thinking, "Wow, God, I'm a comedian now. I've won a big competition. I'm maybe not a famous comedian, but I'm definitely a comedian." And I did a couple of open mic comedy nights here in London, and they went okay. But I was getting very carried away with myself at the time. And I remember a couple of weeks after the final of the district contest, I was going to Canada, to Calgary in Canada, to visit some friends. And I thought, I think I'm going to find a comedy night that's on there, and I'm gonna write to them, and I'm going to tell them I'm a comedian. Up to them to decide whether it's famous or not. Coming from London, and I'm going to offer to come and do some comedy for them. So I found this event. It was on a Monday night. I arrived on the Sunday, and I wrote to them, and they said, "Yeah, come along. We'll put you on our list for the night." So great. I was really excited, and I was expecting kind of an open mic night. There was I knew there was going to be 8 people, 8 comedians that night, and I thought, well, it'll be people kind of a very similar standard to me. And I got there, and there was me. There were 6 comedians who I quickly found out from reading through the kind of little program they had were professional comedians, and all 6 of them had appeared on TV in Canada and were fairly well known. And the final comedian, the headline act for the night, was a world famous actor who most of you will probably know. He's an actor from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. His name's Bob Odenkirk, and he was going to be the headline act that night. So 6 professionals, Bob Odenkirk and me. How someone hadn't done their research correctly to put me on that list, but there I was, and I was number 3 that night. And the first 2 comedians were great, and then I came on, and the audience, obviously, they appreciated me so much they held a special 5-minute period of silence for my act. And then the others came on, and they were all great and got lots of laughs. And then it got to Bob. He was the last one, the big headline act. I think he was just in town, and he's done comedy in the past. And obviously they were going to let Bob come. And he got maybe 10 times more laughter than anybody else in the room that night. And I realized, actually, I was pretty bad, but the other 6 were all very good. And Bob Odenkirk, he was probably as good as them, but he wasn't 10 times better than them. 1 or 2 of them might actually have been a bit better than him, to be honest, with comedy. But he'd got 10 times more laughter than anyone else. And then I started to wonder, I wonder if I'd given Bob my jokes and he'd performed them in exactly the same way as I performed them, would he have got a 5-minute period of silence? I don't think he would. He'd have probably still got a lot of laughs. And I realized that night that humor and comedy, it's not necessarily about how funny we are, but how funny maybe an audience believes that we are. And I think the more real we appear, the more an audience will take to our humor. And if an audience see a face they know, they trust, they like, then they're more likely to believe that person. They're more likely to buy into the humor. And I think it's such a huge thing. Obviously, as Toastmasters, we generally speak in the same clubs and we speak to people we know. So we maybe don't test that so much where we'll go outside and test our humor with people we don't know. But I think comedy and humor, it can be like it's almost like a magic act. I think if people can see how it's done, if they can see there's no real magic there and they can see the workings of how we're putting our comedy together, they just don't enjoy it as much. So if it's a face they trust, a face they know, they can just turn off that. They're not looking for how Bob Odenkirk put his jokes together. It's Bob. We're gonna laugh. So I think comedy has to feel real. It has to feel authentic, and it has to feel true. And you'll see it with even acts that are very silly and very kind of not believable in a way. Maybe going back to someone like Steve Martin, who was crazy on the stage. He kind of kept up that craziness. He wasn't just crazy one day and then do a serious act the next. So buying into a character or buying into if it's the real authentic person, I think it's really important for an audience. And so if we're the silly, crazy comedian one day, we've got to be it the next as well. I think at Toastmasters, and I spoke about this a little bit about this at the conference in May. We focus so much on all the kind of peripheral things to our speaking, which are important. They're tools in a toolbox, not rules in a rule book. Things like vocal variety, movement, props, gestures, all those things. We focus on them so much. And I think the more we include those things, particularly in a humorous speech, the more we bring in the props and the gestures and the movement and all this, the more it becomes an act and the less real we are in some way then. And then I think the less real we are, maybe the less funny we are. So that having the audience buy into the authenticity of our humor, I think is crucial. So I've got 5 things just to cover that maybe can help us develop, into humorous speakers that have written the jokes, have written the stories, but will come across as more authentic. Just before I get into this, Jane asked me if at some point I could have like an interactive session. Apparently, you all like to get involved, so let's do that now. Let's do a joke. So knock knock.
Who's there?
Hope.
Oh,
Hope you all enjoyed the interactive bit. Okay, let's get back to me. Now, what can we do to convince the audiences that we're more real? So number one for me is to, where we can, put our jokes, put our humor into the mouths of characters in our story. So a quick example of this, when I did win the district contest for humor a few years back, I was telling a speech about how it was made up, but it was, the audience didn't believe it, but they bought into it. I was trying to sabotage the previous year's winner. I was going to try and, because he'd won a couple of times, and my speech was about how in the months building up to this contest, I'd tried to sabotage him so he didn't win it again. And I had this joke that I told kind of as my joke halfway through the speech, and it was, why did the Toastmaster cross the road? To make full use of the space. Why did he go back to the other side? Because he didn't like his new pathway. So that was it. And I got a couple of kind of uhs from the audience and nothing else. And I did it the same way at the area and the division and club. But then in the district, I thought, oh, there was a scene in my speech where I'm trying to sabotage this other speaker, and I've gone along to one of his workshops, and I'm passing a note round the audience saying, don't laugh at him. He's asked us not to laugh at him tonight. He wants to test his resolve. And, obviously it's just me being sneaky, trying to get him to lose his faith in his humor. Anyway, he starts panicking, and he's telling jokes desperately because no one's laughing at him, and he's wondering what's wrong. And eventually he gets down to the bottom of the barrel and he says, why did the Toastmaster cross the road? To make full use of the space. Go back to the other side because he didn't like his new pathway. And I did it. So in the district final, I put the joke into his mouth, and suddenly the reaction was 10 times. It was the Bob Odenkirk laugh I got that day, because suddenly there was distance. I think anyway, there was distance between the joke and me. I wasn't trying to make the audience laugh. This isn't an act I'm doing. That's him. That's that, and he's not trying to make you laugh. He's not even here. He's not aware of that this is happening today. So suddenly the audience are like, oh yeah, we can laugh at that. You kind of bring down that barrier of, is this a magic trick? So put jokes into the mouths of your characters where you can. Think about doing that. Number two, self-deprecation. I'm sure you talk about this all the time in this club and are experts with this, but I suppose just looking at it from the angle of the audience for a second, I think when we laugh at ourselves, when we tell the audience, no, you're laughing at me now, it can kind of bring that barrier down maybe because the audience will think, oh, well, he's not. He wouldn't want us to laugh at him. It maybe just confuses them for a second and think, oh, okay, this is funny. Yeah, we can laugh at him. He's not tricking us into laugh at him. He is ridiculous. Let's laugh. I saw an interview just a few days ago with an actress from the US, Margaret Qualley. You might know her. She's very, very young, probably early 20s, and she's been in three big-ish movies this year, but they weren't very successful, I don't think. They were very arty movies, and I've seen a couple of them. They were very good, but they didn't get the big audiences. But she was on a chat show last week, and the interviewer was asking her. They're very kind of risky movies. There's a lot of nudity. She's nude in all three movies. And anyway, the interviewer said to her, were you worried about, I believe you have a very religious family. Were you worried about your family seeing these movies? And she said, yeah, at first I was very worried, and particularly my grandma, she's very religious, and I was worried about that. But in the end, nobody saw any of the movies, so it was fine. And it was just really disarming. Like, you're not used to an actor coming on TV and kind of laughing at themselves. And the interviewer laughed in a way, that kind of non-fake way. It was a real laugh, and she laughed in a way like, "Oh, did I just say that? I'm not sure. That's a good thing. I probably shouldn't have said that." And the audience laughed, and I laughed 8,000 miles away. And just that disarming moment, that self-deprecation. Yeah, nobody's watching any of my movies, so it was fine. Again, brings down the barrier. Number three, observational comedy. Again, I'm sure it's something you all use here, but when you hold up a mirror to the audience, you're not telling a joke anymore. Not really. It's probably one of the easiest kinds of comedy to do because it doesn't take any clever, intricate wordplay or anything like that. You're going to hold up a mirror to the audience and you're going to say, look, that's you. I'm not trying to make you laugh. This isn't me. I'm not telling jokes. You're just looking at yourself in the mirror there. Yeah, you all do that. Yeah. And everybody laughs. A quick example of this, I did my district final for humour this year. And I had a moment in the speech where I was talking about an old teacher of mine for when I was at school. And I wanted to say she was a bit crazy. And so I said, Mrs. Fitzpatrick, she was like a VPE. Now, that wasn't the joke. That was the setup for the joke. But the whole room burst into laughter just because I said she's like a VPE. Basically, I'd held the mirror up. I'd said, look, you're all Toastmasters. There's a VPE. And they all laughed. And it caught me off guard because I wasn't ready for that. I was waiting to do the punchline. I kind of thinking I'm going to get disqualified. Can you all stop laughing now? I need to do the punchline to this joke. And eventually they stopped, but it was the longest laugh of the speech that I got. And then I did the punchline, which was Mrs. Fitzpatrick, she's like a VPE. She was always one roll short of a full agenda. And again, then that got a laugh too, but sometimes just seeing themselves. They forget about you. They forget you're the magician trying to make them laugh. They're just seeing themselves. So that's number three. Number four, be as conversational as you can. It's kind of avoiding those tendencies with when we learn all the things at Toastmasters, all the little tricks we can do with our voice and our props and our gestures and our movement. They're all useful, but still keeping that conversational tone is vital for humor, I think. There's not much more to say on that one. I don't think just keep things as conversational and maybe as under rehearsed as possible with humor. And the last thing on my list is something that's really, really good for Toastmasters. Now that I've said something that maybe doesn't help us so much with our humor, but what is good is I don't think that we're all here to become stand-up comedians, particularly. Maybe one or two of us would like to try that, but we're not particularly out to become stand-up comedians. We're more thinking about how we can add humor to speeches that we're giving and talks that we're giving. And I think that gives us a real advantage with our humor because it means we can let it sneak up on an audience. We can start a speech maybe very seriously, I gave a speech earlier this year about my brother-in-law who died, and the first few lines of it were about him and how he died, and the audience were kind of hanging on that, like, oh, this is really sad. But then I moved on to a story about something that had happened a long time before he died and something that happened to us together, and it was a very funny story. But that humor just kind of crept up on the audience. They weren't expecting it. And so again, there's no magician on stage here. There's no one trying to make you laugh. This is a sad event, and now this is a funny story linked to it. So think about where you can let that humor just gently creep up. Okay, I'm sorry about the very short interactive time, but there we go. Put jokes in the mouths of your characters, self-deprecation, all these things will fool the audience. Observation, be as conversational as you can, and let the humor sneak up on your audience sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, we've made it really one of the goals of this club is not to become stand-up comedians, although if anybody wants to do that, great. But the goal is really to add or uncover the humor in our presentations. We're going to hear from a couple of our members now. First up is Susan Schultz with a Pathways speech from the Engaging Humor Path, Level 3, Engage Your Audience with Humor.